Mr. Chairman.
I call the Honourable David Parker.
Well, I'm very glad that the Honourable David Cunliffe made the earth move for the Minister. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. Which brings me to capital expenditure incurred in emergencies, some of which will be seismic. Mr. Chairman, Clause 127 of the bill repeals Section 23 and then makes the next clause amends Section 24, and then we jump to after Section 25 inserting a new 25A. So on that order, it seems to me that we're not repealing the existing Section 25, we're just inserting a new Section 25A after Section 25. Now, I thought, well, why are we doing this? I thought maybe this is arising out of Christchurch or the Canterbury earthquakes, because Section 25A now says that capital injections may be made in emergencies. The Minister may approve a capital injection to meet an emergency or disaster described in Section 25.1. So I went and I looked up Section 25.1, and it says that it lists this section applies if a state of emergency or a state of civil defence emergency is declared under the Civil Defence Act 1983 or the Civil Defence Emergency Management Act 2002, or a situation occurs that affects the public health or safety of New Zealand or any part of New Zealand that the government declares to be an emergency. So I thought, oh well, yeah, I can see where these capital injections that can be made in emergencies under 25A can be authorised under Section 25A. But then I saw that under Section 25.2, the Minister can already do something very similar, and that the Minister can already approve under Section 25.2 of the existing Act, which is not being repealed by this Act. The Minister may approve expenses or capital expenditure to be incurred to meet the emergency or disaster, and whether or not there is an appropriation by Parliament available for that purpose, and despite some other sections, that capital expenditure may be incurred accordingly. And then it goes on to say that if it hasn't been appropriated in advance, then under subsection 5, then that amount has to be included in the annual financial statements and an appropriation bill for confirmation. So you can do it in the interim, but effectively the appropriation's got to be eventually confirmed by Parliament. So that's already allowed for under Section 25, and I'm a bit I would like some clarification. I'm sure there's a proper reason as to why we need new Section 25A inserted by Clause 129 in addition, but it seems to me to be very close to the situation that's already covered by Section 25, which already allows appropriations for capital expenditure in those emergency situations. So, to the Minister and the Chair, I would ask her to explain why it is that the 25A extension to the sorts of capital injections in emergencies is necessary, because it seems to me that it's pretty well covered already by by Section 25 in the existing Act. And this is just following on the theme that the Honourable Trevor Mallard has raised as to why it is that we sometimes overcomplicate legislation. And I thought the point that he was making earlier is, if you have already defined department, why do you have to define departmental? Because departmental obviously refers to a department. And that was the point that he was making, and perhaps the Minister could address that, because I'm not sure that the Prime Minister and the Chair quite got the essence of my colleague Trevor Mallard's point in that regard. Mr. Chairman, the other point I would like clarification on is in respect of strategic intentions. Now, sections 38 to 41 of the existing Act are being replaced. They're being replaced with a new clause which refers to strategic intentions, whereas previously the departments had to provide information on future operating intentions. Now, I'm not sure whether this is because, Mr. Chairman.
I call the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure whether this is because the government has formed the view that the information that departments have been providing on their future operating intentions has become so detailed and or so general as to not be strategic, and whether either because it's too detailed or it's too superficial, they don't think the existing information being provided is strategic enough. But the new wording seems the point of difference seems to be that instead of providing information on future operating intentions, they've now got to provide information on strategic intentions. Now, in terms of the timing of that information, the Minister can at any time require the department responsible to that Minister to provide new information on strategic intentions. And I can see a number of areas where that would be necessary in the current government, given their failure to meet election promises that were made to the electorate, which they must be feeling at risk about in terms of future voting intention. That's not true, says John Hay. Well, I'd like to list a few examples. Say goodbye to higher taxes, not your loved ones. Remember that one? Come on, you don't like being held to account for your promises, do you? That's right, yeah. That was one of your election promises. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, sorry, though I did not mean to. The member for Hamilton.
Mr. Chairman, was very promising.
I'll name you more than one. Not just the promise to halt the people going to Australia, to halt the reason for them leaving. They were going to say they're going to overcome the wage gap. They were going to deal to the wage gap. What's happened since? It's grown. It's grown. So I would have thought that ministers that were up to their game would be revising the strategic intentions for their department so that they do a bit better in that regard, because until now it's been an abject failure. I mean, this government talks about introducing national standards for schools, but maybe instead of strategic intentions being the topic here, they should actually introduce some standards for themselves, including being held to account for their election promises. Mr. Chairman, another area of strategic intention that Bill English used to talk about, he came to power saying he was going to rebalance the economy towards exports. Exports as a percentage of GDP are flat. They are flat, and indeed this year they may go down as a percentage of GDP. Another strategic area of failure, and I can see how it might be more meaningful for members of the public, instead of changing the requiring more information on strategic intentions for the department, it might be more useful for the public to have some report on whether the strategic objectives of the government as promised at prior election were being met by actual outcomes in New Zealand. So I wonder why it is that they've moved from information on future operating intentions to strategic intentions. It's interesting that the department's got to, once these strategic intentions are produced, they must, as soon as practicable, after providing the information to their responsible minister, publish the information on an internet site maintained by or on behalf of the department. And that's provided in new section 39, which is also part of this clause 136. So clause 136 doesn't just insert a new clause 38, it also includes inserts a new clause 39 that says these things have to be put up on a website as soon as practical, except if there's a budget coming up. And then if the government wants to keep it secret during that period, in the 3 months before the minister delivers a budget, that department must not publish the information, which is, and when I say information, they mean the strategic intentions that the department is identifying, perhaps after the Minister has asked them to change them. So, Mr. Chairman,
I call the honourable member Sue Moroney.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was very